pássaros passavam e alegria. Que bela natureza o Brasil tem. E a onda do mar linda. Olha que bela. Tudo era feito ao redor de Clara. O mundo inteiro. Guarda Civil sorria. Outros elementos eram azuis, rosas, alaranjados. Que delícia!
Good evening and welcome. I will now proceed to give instructions about Spanish interpretation for this wonderful event that you're joining tonight. Buenas noches y bienvenidos. Si desean escuchar este evento en el idioma español, por favor, tomen un teléfono y marquen la línea 844-857-5555. Una vez que hayan llamado, les va a pedir un número de acceso. El número de acceso es 811-7900. Lo repito, 811-7900. De esta forma podrán accesar el evento con interpretación al idioma español. Esta información de igual forma se va a poner en el chat para su acceso. Gracias y que disfruten. Enjoy the event. Good evening.
Thank you, Milena. Welcome, welcome everybody to Me Too's 4th anniversary global partnership announcement and conversation. My name is Danny Ayers. I use pronouns she and her. I serve as CEO of Me Too International, and I'm really excited to be here. We have 4 really powerful panelists here with us that we're going to be in conversation with for the next hour. And so I will name them now and then talk a little bit about the format for tonight. I'm joined by my colleague, Me Too International founder and Me Too Movement founder and executive director, Tarana Burke, Latanya Mapp Frett, the president and CEO of Global Fund for Women, Thenmozhi Soundararajan, executive director of Equality Labs, and Carola Baez Pedrajo of Tu Historia Importa. Welcome to you all. I want to just share with everyone that we are all going to stay on video for the next hour. We're going to be in conversation. I'm going to start with Tarana and Latanya, and then bring in Thenmozhi and Carola to talk about the work that they are doing in their organizations, in their communities. And I'm going to start, like I said, with Tarana and Latanya. We have a video to show toward the end, and then we want to collect Q&A as we go through. So if you have questions, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will track questions and try to get to as many as possible, time permitting. Any questions that we don't get to, the Me Too team is in the chat and we'll hold them, and we will answer them via email after the event. So anyone who registered will get to see responses to the questions asked. So feel free to drop those questions in as the conversation is moving along. All right, I want to jump right in because we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. So Tarana and Latanya, I want to ask you about this partnership. You know, we know that the harm and pervasiveness of sexual violence is global, and we are heartened to see that so too is the resistance that is happening, that has been happening for decades. And I want to talk a little bit about what the seeds were of this partnership and why it matters, and sort of, you know, why it matters and what do we seek to do in advancing the global movement to end sexual violence. Why don't we start with you, Latanya?
Let me come off of mute. Thank you, Danny. It's so good to be here, and I'm so glad that we're finally at a point where we could announce this partnership. So just so you know, a little bit of background, I had just taken over the helm at Global Fund for Women, and Tarana was being honored for her work in Australia, where one of my board members was in attendance. And she, my board member, thought Tarana and I knew each other because, you know, all badass Black women, you know each other. But to her credit, she connected us. And when we spoke, we knew. The Me Too movement has grown. So many countries have asked to connect with efforts in the US. Their requests have sparked this vision of a global community that centers survivor leadership through deep cross-country relationship building and practice sharing. And that's why the Me Too movement and Global Fund for Women have easily joined forces to support global movements to end sexual violence. And I don't say that lightly. I'm in love with Angela Davis's quote, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world," right? And you have to do it all the time. So by providing funding and other resources, Global Fund for Women aims to support the Me Too global movement and becoming a well-resourced global ecosystem that works to end sexual and gender-based violence and make healing and actionable support systems available to survivors. The thing is, feminists around the globe have been organizing around sexual and gender-based violence for many years, yet they are often doing so without the benefit of connection and solidarity and on a shoestring budget. So what wins could we unlock if organizers could more easily share learnings and resources and information with each other and access better resources to sustain this work? We did a survey. I know, Danny, you will talk about this a little bit, of 421 organizations working in sexual and gender-based violence, and 99% of them indicated they are interested in future engagement with Global Fund for Women and Me Too International. So we have power when we come together across geographies and learn from each other. And that's what this work is about. It's about disrupting rape culture across borders. We know it can be done because it is being done. From the Rice Bunny movement in China to sex for grades in Kenya to you kula rinkasin, which means you may lose sleep in Turkey. Me Too has already transcended national borders. And Me Too activism against sexual and gender-based violence has been transformational. It has catalyzed mass movements globally. It's resulted in inventive community-appropriate activism against GBV and energized national legislation and, quite frankly, global policy. But there's been a backlash against the Me Too movement, and it's fueled by this patriarchy and resistance to disrupting the status quo. We need funding to scale up, to sustain and boost the movement's impact for the long term. Black feminists have always been at the forefront of social justice movements. Yet in 2018, out of nearly $70 billion in foundation giving globally, less than half of 1%, and that's half of 1%, went to Black feminist social movements. That's important new data that we're getting from the Black Feminist Fund and the Human Rights Funders Network. I mean, we already know that less than 1% of gender equality funding gets to grassroots feminist organizations. We have to change that. We have to help. And that's why, stay tuned, because what you're going to hear, what we're rolling out in this next phase of the partnership and support for survivor justice movements globally is really, really going to get at that. Over to you, Danny.
Thank you so much, Latanya. Appreciate it. And appreciate you naming some of the funding patterns that this work is trying to disrupt. The folks at Black Feminist Fund and their research has really been some stark realities about how much money is actually moving. Tarana, I want to ask you, what about the spirit of this partnership was so important for Me Too as an organization to be part of, to step into? Why are we going global and why are we doing it now? Oh, you're on mute, love.
Of course I am. Hi. When Me Too went viral, one of the most fascinating things to me was beyond, the millions of people who were responding on the internet, having conversations on the internet, was that it wasn't just a national conversation, right? And it was beyond my comprehension that we could even have a national dialogue about sexual violence. But this very interesting, while in the United States, there were people who were finding community and talking about it online, and offline to some degree, around the world, there were pockets of people who were finding each other through social media in other countries, and social media really was their organizing tool, right? There were pockets of people who discovered or built a movement, an actual boots on the ground movement, and started from social media, and they were empowered by the community they saw it being built when hashtag Me Too went viral. And so I would get these messages from around the world, from people saying, you know, there are 10 people in Kenya, there are 5 people in Nigeria, there are 2, you know, just saying, what can you help us? We want to build this. And then these Me Too started popping up on the internet. Me Too India, Me Too Australia, Me Too Switzerland started popping up on the internet, and they were looking to me for some support. And so when the partnership with Global Fund for Women came about, you know, as an organization, we had started talking about how can we get our hands around this opportunity, because although there's a huge movement against gender-based violence internationally, a lot of that movement has been fueled by really big NGOs and you know, organizations that sometimes miss the people who are on the ground, that are really focused on policy change and things like that we absolutely need. But there's another element of grassroots people who are taking what they have to make what they need, and that is directly in line with how our movement started. It was filling a gap and filling a void in the community. And so what we were missing, the element, we have the framework and we have the ethos, and we were missing a partner who both got it, you know, that got what we were trying to do, that was not trying to come in top heavy and tell folks in other countries how they can how to make their lives better, but wanted to partner with bringing resources, connecting people, and helping to build these organic movements and strengthen these organic movements. And so that's why this partnership it was just so perfect, because from the first time we started sitting, and even it helped us even reshape how we were approaching it, right? Initially, we were coming in with one idea, and I think this is why collaboration is beautiful, because you bring more thoughts and more analysis to the table, and then people can say, well, this is how we've been thinking of it. And I think what we've developed over the last 2 years is bigger and stronger and more beautiful than what we could have done alone. So, and that's usually the case.
That is the perfect segue, Tarana. We didn't even plan that. So what I wanted to talk about next, which is what the first phase of this work has been. We've been quietly meeting with Global Fund for Women for the better part of 2 years to talk about this partnership, to really ideate around how we bring our values into the work that we seek to do together. And what we knew is that we needed time to listen to the global community about their work, their experiences, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, the framing that they bring to their communities, and how they would like to be in relationship with us, right? We didn't want to come into this partnership and say, this is what we're going to do, without having listened to the global community about what would actually add value. And so during this first phase, which has been over the past year or so, we put together a survey translated in 5 languages. We sent it out to close to 500 organizations. Many of these were Global Fund for Women's, like the relationships that they have had over the last 5 years, and all of the organizations and individuals that had reached out to Me Too over the last several years. And the biggest surprise, you send out a survey and you expect 10% response, is that we got 420 responses to that survey, which in itself said something major about the desire for folks to communicate. But we learned so much. In addition, we did 10 consultations, individual conversations with organizations across the global South, and culled together kind of, what the global community is looking for and facing. And I'll just name a few things that we learned from this first phase. The largest body of work that organizations want to do over the next essentially 2 years is movement and coalition building, building strategic partnerships and learning exchanges with other folks who are doing gender-based violence work across the globe. That was the largest sort of body of work that folks want to address. The second was expanding and improving services for the communities they serve. And as we've talked about, as Latanya highlighted beautifully, funding is, we were not surprised to see that funding continues to rank highest in terms of the needs that continue to plague the work of doing gender-based violence, particularly in communities of color. And then I want to just echo what Latanya said, that one of the data points that surprised me the most, all of us the most, was that out of all of those organizations that responded, only 2 said that they did not want to be in relationship with this partnership, which gave us a tall order. How do we engage so many organizations meaningfully? And so now that becomes, now with all of this information, this is the work that Global Fund for Women and Me Too will take on, is, sort of how to build this global community in really meaningful ways.
Danny, can I hop in just a second?
Absolutely.
In the chat is Carrie Gardner, that we were just talking about, the board member who brought us all together, and she hopped on here. So we just wanted to give a quick shout out to Carrie. Thank you, because our meeting in your garden bore fruit, like as you said, and has, 2 years later, this amazing collaboration, it has happened. And so just wanted to give a quick thank you and shout out to her.
Yeah, that's amazing. Welcome. And we have another board member, looks like, from Global Fund for Women. So welcome to y'all. Actually, that's a great segue, because I would love to bring in Thenmozhi and Carola to have a conversation about their work and what they're doing. We wanted to sort of highlight some of the groups that we talked to in this initial phase, that we really were, frankly, just blown away by what is happening on the ground. And Carola and Thenmozhi are amazing examples of the kinds of work that is moving. So I just want to ask you each to tell us a little bit about your work, you individually, you as an organization, and what you all are moving in your day-to-day work. Carola, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, Danny. Thank you, Tarana. Thank you, Latanya. Thank you all in the Me Too movement, not only for the movement, but also for doing this partnership, and also for letting us speak out in this wonderful event on the work that we're doing in Mexico. So our project is called Tu Historia Importa, which means your story matters. And so this project was born so we could start questioning collectively the romanticization of the legal justice system and the lack of opportune information for those who had experienced sexual violence in Mexico. Because when the pandemic started, well, me and my other partners, colleagues, Artemisa and Alejandra, we all do grassroots work towards eradicating gender-based violence. We have done it through civil society. We have done it through social media projects. And now, when the pandemic struck, a lot of women were coming from different parts and in different sources, asking us what to do, because they had been sexually assaulted. And so we didn't really know what to tell them, because in Mexico, the validity of your story comes through reporting. You know, they tell you, go to the police, you should definitely report. But the thing is that we want to give women the tools to take back their own narratives, to take back their own stories, and to understand that they don't need to really report to the police or report to the government to make that story valid and to make it true and to heal. So what we decided to do is to start researching different kinds of platforms that had been set into the world. And we found one called, that was based in the UK, called Your Story Matters, from an organization called Chen, that they do wonderful work, and it's all survivor based. And we thought, you know, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to focus on, given the circumstances, the very special circumstances of Mexico, because we know that to question justice is also to question the patriarchy, in terms of it has no gender perspective. It ignores intersectionality. It ignores the fact that we know that the deck is stacked against us. And so unluckily, or sadly, in Mexico, the justice system is very ineffective, and it re-victimizes the survivors. And reporting is just not enough. You know, it has proven to be not enough in terms of healing emotionally, psychologically, and not enough in terms of justice overall. And so many communities have been seeking other kinds of justice, restorative justice, through their own traditions and outside of the legal justice system. And that is also one of our objectives in the project. What we want also is to see what other women are doing, right? What does it mean to build and to build another different kind of our concept of justice? And what does it mean to collectively heal? And also another objective of this platform, which is digitally based, is to connect as many survivors as we can, but also to start changing the narrative on how we view survivors, how we think about their stories, how we empathize with their stories, and how we empathize in terms of how they view justice. And so, I mean, I guess just to wrap up and give Thenmozhi time to discuss her project. So what we want with our digital platform is to provide useful, accessible, opportune information, not only on in terms of the judicial system, so it's easier to navigate, to know what you might expect of it, and to maybe connect with the lawyers, you know, these wonderful unicorns that you might find in the system that help you out, that give a gender perspective and that treat women equally, whether you're trans, you're a woman from an indigenous community, whether you're white or not. Because the thing of it is that right now in Mexico, we are still living in a very much colonialized society. And if we don't start speaking as upstanders, that's never going to end. We have to start providing tools and start, you know, rethinking our privileges and start acting also like accomplices to survivors in order for this to change. And so that's also what we want to provide from our digital platform, Your Story Matters, or Tu Historia Importa. This is what we think that needs to be, you know, this is what we think that projects, where our project should be based upon. And it's really about sorority and empathy and everything that I think Me Too stands for, which is, as you said, more than a hashtag. Thank you.
Thank you. Thenmozhi, please tell us about Equality Labs and your work.
Sure, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us and for all the survivors that are tuning in. Like, it's such a wonderful thing to be in beloved community with each other as we heal and talk deeply about the world that we want to build. So, I want to talk a little bit about the work that we do in Equality Labs because we are a Dalit feminist organization. And the way that we approach the issue of gender-based violence is through the lens of caste, because in our context in South Asia, that is the intersectional problem. So for folks who don't know a lot about caste, it's a system of oppression analogous to race, where, people created this really disgusting social fiction that said some people at the top were pure and got all the things, and that the majority of the population was at the bottom and deserved to be exploited. And there's punishing violence. It's why we call it caste apartheid. And a core part of this violence is sexual violence. And that's because caste is very much about the control of the reproductive function of all peoples. And so when a woman is pure and maintains caste hierarchy, that's great. And then there's groups of women that are Dalit, who are caste oppressed, who face punishing violence, both in terms of ways to control caste oppressed communities, but also because of the extreme license that exists to upper caste people. And for folks that are familiar with the way that race and gender-based violence work, you can think of the plantation system and the forced breeding projects and the dehumanization and the breakdown of Black families. That's exactly what Dalit people have faced for centuries. And I think this is why it's so important about the way Dalit movements and Dalit survivors have really connected and been part of the Me Too platform, is that I think it's really important that when we talk about intersectionality, what intersectionality looks like in the global north is very different than what it looks like in the global south. In the global north, we have to talk about white supremacy. We have to talk about histories of settler colonialism and slavery. But in contexts like South Asia, the defining paradigm was actually caste. And so what was so difficult is that, even though every hour 3 Dalit women are raped, 3 Dalit women are raped. In the course of this session, we will see survivors who are going to be grappling with their legacies of pain. And yet, you see Dalit women underrepresented on global feminist platforms everywhere. And that's because we had upper caste feminists that were gatekeeping our stories. They would use our bodies. They would use the data of the crimes that we were facing, but they would make sure that there was never our stakeholder position globally. And I think some of the work that we do in Equality Labs, I want to be very clear, we are not the only Dalit feminist org and leader doing this work. We are a leaderful ecosystem of Dalit women that are saying we cannot afford to lose another daughter, another sister, another mother, another grandmother. We want another way forward other than this despicable violence. And in many ways, I think that, some of the ways that we've been able to be part of the global Me Too platform is by platforming more and more Dalit women and being able to sideswipe those gatekeepers to let Dalit women speak on their own platforms. And there's been incredible Dalit women and queer and non-binary leaders that have talked about their vision beyond caste-based sexual violence, which includes, Manisha Mashal, who is one of the most amazing leaders who was part of this really incredible march called the Dalit Women Self-Respect March. There are women from Dalit Women Fight, which led this really powerful campaign and continue to do that work with Dalit Women Rise. And there's also the Indian Council of Women Leaders and Dalit Human Rights Defenders Network that are all mobilizing and thinking about new tactics in terms of how to approach this systemic problem. And I think the thing that I'm really struck by in thinking about the work we do at Equality Labs is that while we partner and build relationships with survivors thinking and dreaming about new tactics beyond this violence, I think what's so important is to think about what is needed to take a survivor from a place of pain to a place of power. And that is really the problem that I see when I think about work in the global south. Because, for example, when you think about Dalit women, we have many survivors that are in very deep rural contexts. At every point of engagement that they're dealing with trying to address their harm, they are re-violated by the system. Whether it's police who, re-rape them, or abuse them when they come in to file complaints, doctors who refuse to do evidence collection and treating of wounds, and instead like actually do this really gross measurement called the two-finger test, where they're trying to test if the woman was promiscuous and having that be the course of her evidence in this process, to judges who laugh at victims who are sharing their stories and have videos of their rape, and their response to those crimes are, well, hey, you have proof that you enjoyed yourself. So that's the challenge that we're really dealing with, is that when you are living in such a violent apartheid state, and you also have systemic impunity, the models that are developed around accountability of harm doers don't really work for those of us that are in longer extended impunity contexts. And particularly in South Asia, we're actually seeing the entire region really suffering also from like ethno-nationalism, religious ethno-nationalisms, which are just kind of toxic patriarchy, just setting our democracies on fire. In those moments, that's exactly when the world needs to invest in survivors. Because survivors know that we need to build communities that center healing, not toxicity. We need to also be able to create new models of consent and power building, because when it comes to systems like caste, we didn't consent to any of it. We didn't consent to our land being raped. We didn't consent to our villages being destroyed. We didn't consent to these motherfuckers coming trying to rape us at every single part of our ages. But what we want is the opportunity to dream. And I think that's one of the shameful ways that I think that survivors are taught to hold the shame of their crimes and also to be marginalized to the edge of society. And I think the power of Me Too, especially when we are globally connected, is we're saying, we don't want to join you at your fucking table. We are going to make our own table. And at that table of power, we're going to reimagine what consent looks like, and turning survivor healing into survivor political power, so that we are running candidates. We are imagining new possibilities for healing. We're thinking about democracies that don't maim and don't build borders through rape and violence, but actually create democracy through consensus and possibility and productive conflict. These are things that I see Dalit women experimenting with every day. And we're not waiting for an impugned state that doesn't value our people to catch up with us. We are building the alternatives now. And that's the power of Dalit Bahujan, feminist futures, is that when we are able to use platforms like Me Too, as well as other hashtags that we've used like Smash Brahminical Patriarchy, we are really looking at this moment about not just stopping the harm, but dreaming about that consented future. And I think that it can feel so hard to dream when things are so violent. But actually, most people can't begin to feel freedom unless it begins in their imaginary. And so we have to fight for that dream and be able to be invested in so we can begin experimenting. And, my call in terms of how, thinking about the global partnership is we need to fund people to experiment. We need to be able to think about, it took a long time to develop rape culture. Patriarchy got tons of investment. They exploited enormous countries to be able to get to the place of global rape culture. We need a similar ambitious investment in consent culture and in a world where survivors are centered. And Dalit women are going to be right at that table because we are not a small community. Caste impacts 1.6 billion people in the world. 1 out of 4 people are South Asian. Imagine the intersectional problem that Dalit women are solving when we are saying we don't want to be raped anymore. We want to be the architects of the present society and the future. And Me Too really gives platforms for survivors like us to be able to connect with other survivors that are connecting the world. And if Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg can build these stupid ass companies that are destroying our societies, give that money to a survivor and see what she builds.
Amazing. Thank you, Thenmozhi. So well said. We don't have too much longer in this segment, but I do want to ask both Carola and Thenmozhi just one more question, and I would ask you to try to take 60 seconds to answer it. And it's a big question to answer in 60 seconds, but I want to just hear from you all really concisely a little bit about the vision that you know it will take to really interrupt gender-based violence in your communities. So could you just name sort of what conditions need to actually shift in your communities in order to make an impact on gender-based violence? And I know, because I know that there are unique dynamics in every community globally. And so just want to hear what your vision is in terms of how you're going to, how your organization work to shift that culture. Carola?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, we need to stop thinking about women as objects. I mean, and just think about, why are we not having any, comprehensive sexual education when women are being sold. Well, not even women, girls are being sold in the pandemic. It increased quite a bit, sold to grown-ass men who are raping them and having children with them. So also teen pregnancy increased quite a bit as well. And so they tell us, well, it's a women's problem, it's a women's problem in education. Well, it's a women's problem because we're being raped like since birth. And so we need more comprehensive education. We need to start understanding that women are people who need fundamental rights. And so what we're trying to do is try to give women enough tools to empower themselves and to try to get organized collectively, because this is the only way that this shift is going to come about. If we as women start, organizing ourselves collectively and start empathizing with ourselves and start breaking with the patriarchy. And one of the things that we're also trying to eradicate is this hate towards other kinds of women, trying to dig into the intersectionality of it all. Because there's right now in Mexico, at least, there's a lot of hate and a lot of pushback against trans women and against women of color and against indigenous women. Like, they don't pertain. So it's basically non-feminism, right? It's like white feminism, and it's still the what's it called in English? This missing white woman syndrome, and we're still living that. And we need to start focusing on representation. Trans women need representation. Sex workers need representation, and they're not getting that because nobody wants to talk about it. It's not something good girls do, represent other kinds of women that don't look like me. And this is what we need to start doing. And I'm sorry I took too long, but
No,
I just feel very passionate about this point and very passionate about stressing the point that we need to start opening these spaces and represent and being the upstanders here.
Thank you, Carola. And we'll have a minute for the whole panel to talk a little bit more about intersectionality in a moment. So definitely want to come back to that. Thenmozhi.
Yeah, I just want to really just make this a numbers problem, guys. Like, let's talk like white men, okay? So, if we want to talk about the cost of rape, so unfortunately we don't have data for this for India, so I'm going to use like American data so you guys can see the problem. Every victim of rape spends over the course of her lifetime $122,000 for the repair and the return of her harm. That's not society taking care of it for creating the conditions. That's women absorbing that, their families absorbing that. And most of them don't get that care. So, and knowing Tarana, much of this work before Me Too even happened, women put on their credit cards. People would collectively fundraise. You would do whatever you could because you couldn't let your sister go into the ditch. But imagine 122,000. So over the course of a lifetime, that's $3.1 trillion in the United States that this sexual violence is occurring. And that's for like about 300 million people. Okay, South Asia is 1.9 billion people. So we're talking about 10 to 15 trillion, right? So if we want to put a dent in this on a global issue, we need to be able to raise $1 trillion. Imagine if we had $1 trillion endowment to stop sexual violence. But we're not talking about it in the negative. We want an investment of 2 trillion. Let's just start, let's go, you know, we're gonna go mild. 2 trillion in not just stopping rape culture, but investing in what comes into consent culture. Because all of the groups that are here are not just helping survivors through services, they're doing an entire ecosystem of support for what it takes to bring survivors back into society, from advocacy to mental health and services, and you're working in environments where your democracies are in crisis. So what if we were to invest and get 2 trillion as an endowment? Then what we could start to talk about is that every single group that was part of a platform had guaranteed operating for 5 years. What would that mean if every single women's organization that worked on this issue had operating for 5 years and didn't have to stress and hustle to speak about this issue, but could start experimenting and dreaming? We invest in the dumbest things as society. Do we really need to see Jeff Bezos going to the fucking Mars? Absolutely not. We do not need that. Do we need to be able to see whether or not Facebook can fuck up another internet environment and do the metaverse? No. What we need to do is be able to guarantee every child on this planet can live a life as an adult without being fucking raped. The fact that we can't say that today in 2021 is not a failure of resources, it's a failure of imagination. And that's what we're here to say, is that let's invest in women and survivors as if we really wanted to live in a world without rape. Not we feel bad that shitty things happen and we're making money off of it, because that's the paradigm. If we want to think that lamely, then what we're going to be talking about is let's just raise a $2 million fund to stop this. We don't need 2 million. We need 3 trillion, 5 trillion, because those costs are being borne by the survivors. And I think we need to ignite those survivors to really open up that next possibility of the world that we want, because we know that the world does it. The one thing we saw out of COVID is that when everybody faces the problem, the world is like, oh, okay, we've got this. Let's offer socialized daycare. Let's offer, payments for people during this time period so they're not being evicted out of their house and they have unemployment. We just lack imagination when it comes to rape culture because we think that women and gender nonconforming and non-binary bodies don't matter. And I think that what we need to say is that no, we're taking it all over. We need to take the power back from the people who don't think that our futures belong to them and say we want those radical feminist futures.
Okay, well, Thenmozhi, thank you so much for that. Carola, thank you so much for that. I don't want to take up any time in terms of summarizing that. I think it all speaks for itself. And I know we don't have a ton of time left. I want to make sure we sort of get back into our last segment here. I'm going to bring Tarana and Latanya back into the conversation. Sort of one last question, but before we get to that, we want to hear from the folks that are in the audience. We have a 3-question poll that will be placed in the chat. It just has been placed in the chat, it looks like. Very quick poll, and it just asks for everyone who is in the audience to give your perspective. It also asks where you are in the world, and we'd love to find out kind of who's on the call today, and your opinions on some of these issues. So please take a quick moment to fill out that poll and send that in to us. We wanted to take a moment to look at a clip that took place back in 2019. A Chilean feminist theater did a mass action at the Chilean capital in response to its inaction and on violence against women. The song, A Violador en tu camino, or a rapist in your path, names the government and state actors as the rapists. And it went viral, sparking a transnational protest. And survivor activists from India to Colombia to the US replicated this action. And we wanted to use this clip as a way to talk about the work of the activists across the globe trying to interrupt and end sexual violence, and talking a little bit about the intersectionality of all of these issues. I believe our tech folks are going to, bring it up for us to take a moment. It's about 1 minute and 30 long, and then we'll come back and ask each of our panelists to comment. Wow. I've seen that a few times, and it's never, it's always incredibly powerful. It never dims. I just want to take the time to have folks sort of, what is your reaction to that video? What speaks to you and stands out most loudly to you about the transnational response? And, you know, if we use that as a springboard to talk about the fact that we know that sexual violence is part of a system of social justice issues that span. And we know that, as Carola mentioned earlier, I think Thenmozhi mentioned this as well, solving for one social justice issue is not enough. And I want to kind of talk about the intersectionality, the need to address these issues in an intersectional way. Let me stop there. Tarana, do you want to jump in first, please?
Yeah, you know, sadly, the thing that strikes me when I see that is that you don't see America. And that, but also one of the things that makes me excited about this global partnership is that the energy. So I think I was in Barcelona when that was taking place, when that was happening. But the energy that you see around the world with people willing to take to the streets and organize around sexual violence, we haven't been able to replicate in the same way in the United States. And that is, this is a big part of my dream and vision for us, is that we are about healing and action. And I really love to see that level of action happening, because just to the sheer visuals of it, right, of all these mostly women moving in solidarity around this issue it's just rare. It's rare in this country for sure. So that was the thing that struck me. It's a beautiful thing, and I hope that this work that we're doing will be a part of capturing some of that sort of magic and helping people and bringing it to other places, including the United States.
Yeah, thank you. Latanya, jump in.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I just want to shout out my sisters who've been talking about this work. I'm just excited listening, to where they are. I mean, because the truth is the work of ending sexual violence is like inherently intertwined with ending other forms of oppression. And, sexual and gender-based violence manifests in so many different forms. I was wondering if we added to the list, like the amount, the cost, because I don't think we have, not just rape, but domestic violence, trafficking, rape as a weapon of war, femicide, other harmful practices such as child marriage and FGM, or female genital mutilation, and dowry. And I could probably go on, which is really sad. But we do know, and as was mentioned, that patriarchy, capitalism, state violence, all are playing a part in keeping these systems moving. And, listen, with all forms of exploitation and oppression, I feel like gender-based violence disproportionately impacts those who are further marginalized. And I think that's what we've been talking about. So marginalization by race, by class, and so many other intersecting identities is why we have to do this work, why we have to partner to do this work. The vast majority of groups surveyed by Global Fund for Women work intersectionally. They don't have the privilege of just working on one issue. And if we are going to work on shifting power and privilege for a few into equity and equality for all of us, which is my vision, this can't happen in a silo. And just, it's just so important that we're able to do these things together. We're able to have the movements lead. We're able to support their capacity. And I, for one, am just so proud to be here with all of you doing this work.
Thank you, Latanya. And I just, obviously I want to get the reactions from you, Carola and Thenmozhi, but also include in your responses, just to build on what Latanya shared. Why is it so crucial to work alongside other social justice movements in order for us to make a dent in gender-based violence across the globe? Carola, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, I mean, access to justice looks very differently across the spectrum of women. And so what we need, well, what I think is important to bring apart, about with these partnerships is to understand how we can bring intersectionality into the justice system. So not justice system as a legal system, but how does it look for any woman to access justice and for that to be valid to the whole, to the whole population. And also, I think that that if we start teaming up little organizations as Tu Historia Importa with bigger organizations, that will also amplify our local stories. And I think that we need to start doing that, because the Me Too was a phenomenon, and it also happened in Mexico, and it also happened in Canada, and it also, and it just went boom, and we all heard about, Harvey Weinstein, and we all heard about, all of these moguls and people, coming forward with, and all of the survivors coming forward with their stories, which also made us in Mexico wanting to do that as well, having somewhere to be heard and seen. And that I think is what this is about as well. We're not being, as intersectionality goes, the more you get into the intersections, the less seen and the less heard, because the less access to privileges you have. And so how are we going to provide or give the tools to that girl who's in the Sierra of Oaxaca, who by 15 will have 2 children because she was married off? How are we going to do that? And as Thenmozhi said, we need to fund. We need to fund these grassroots organizations, grassroots projects, and also start thinking about the types of narratives that their culture is playing into. So what does justice look like? And start, understanding also what justice looks like in their cultures, in their subcultures, and in their collective organizations. And maybe stop and think, I don't want to colonialize. Maybe Your Story Matters or Tu Historia Importa is just giving you some tools, but how do we make it that also your own local tools work for you? So I think that we can amplify a lot of the messages that we're putting on in line, and we can amplify a lot by partnering up with larger organizations like Me Too movement, but we also need to know how to, I think it's going to give us a lot of strength, but also to contextualize, because I do think that context matters a lot. And I think that this also resonates with you all. And that's why maybe Tarana said, well, I would love for America to look like this, and it did resonate. For example, the Chilean thing, the thesis, we sing it still, in Mexico, and we love it because it really resonates with us, because we feel raped by the system and we feel raped by the government, and we're so afraid of policemen, and we're so afraid of going to the government and saying, this happened, because we know we're going to get re-victimized. And so that's what we need to, partner up with Me Too, and partner up with other grassroots organizations to see how we can do it, so we don't, one, colonialize and just take over their narrative, but give tools to see if that will empower them and just take over their own narrative. I do think that we need to respect their own narratives.
Yeah, thank you, Carola. And I think the video really does speak to the power when we come together as global organizations, individuals doing this work. And that's exactly what we're seeking to do with this partnership. And what we heard is that folks absolutely want that. Thenmozhi?
Yeah, well, I want to go to like what Tarana was speaking to, which was like that video really struck me that there weren't BIPOC communities from the United States, because to me, what I think is so powerful, especially in terms of like Black and Dalit relationship building, is that Black internationalism actually platformed so many oppressed groups to be able to see themselves in intersectional processes. And it was so funny, as a Dalit woman, you know, I did not see myself in post-colonial writers because they were all upper caste people, but I saw myself in the writing of Bell Hooks and Patricia Hill Collins and, you know, Kimberly Crenshaw, who at the World Conference Against Racism in Durban built very deeply with Dalit feminists and has kept those relationships even today. So to me, I think that the promise of intersectionality, especially like under a Me Too framework, is that oppressed peoples build strong intersectional relationships where they're able to see each other and build material solidarities across these networks of impunity. Because in the context of the United States, settler colonialism and white supremacy are the problem. In South Asia, it's Brahmanism. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've seen such powerful leaders like Manjula Pradeep and Raya Sarkar, who were working on these issues and were sidelined by dominant caste feminists, prevented to sit and talk with funders, prevented from meeting with other feminists around these issues because of how people recreate, you know, patterns of harm and dominance even within women's movements. And I think it's so critical that when we're talking about bringing survivors to the table, we're bringing to the table survivors who are struggling under those intersectional oppressions. And I think as a Dalit person, I found that so healing, like whether it was like one-on-one conversations with Tarana about what it was like to be thinking about this for our communities when we were younger, but also institutionally to be able to platform our people directly to talk to each other without those gatekeepers, telling you what a survivor should look like, what proper organizing should look like, and defining it solely in terms of the justice system, and not understanding that, you know, like to give you an example, one of the first funder meetings I went to, I remember I was like in my 20s, and I was so excited because when I would go to that funder meeting hotel, it was a time where I had my own bed, because at that time I was sharing a 1-bedroom with, like, you know, my family, and I slept on the couch and my mom and my sister shared the bed. And so when I would go to that hotel meeting, I had my own bed and I had my own room for the first time. And I've met so many other survivors that when they go into funder space, you know, they're doing all these things to collect the resources. So I remember this one activist who took her entire per diem and actually brought her food with her and was planning to eat that food because she wanted to use that per diem for like rent and for other things back at home. She didn't want to tell the funder that was what was happening because she was coming at a place of deficit into this place of plenty that philanthropy is. And so, but she was just trying to hustle, you know, and I think that's what we need to shift. We need to invest in these leaders like we believe them to be the people who are holding our future, because they are. Nobody believes that any of these white people, white men that are in power are going to take us forward. We need to invest in those that have really understood violence because they've experienced in their bodies. And knowing that violence breaks meaning allowed them to create the meaning of our new world. And that means lots of things. It means healing, it means services, but it means also spaciousness and rest. Because so many survivors that are part of this movement that are in atrocity-prone areas, they are dealing with survivors like around the clock. Like Manisha Mashal, who I was sharing with you, you know, she needs a sabbatical. You know, she has worked on this issue for 10 years. She is getting calls from survivors from 10 in the morning until 3 at night. And, you know, there's that place where you feel like, I can't not pick up that phone. Because if I don't pick up that phone, who could get hurt if I don't? So people keep picking up the phone because we're in triage. We're not upstream and thinking, you know, system solution. We're just pulling people out of the river that are drowning. And I think that investment, that call to invest in as much money as possible, is about us going upstream from the triage place to the vision place.
Yeah.
I have to say that Thenmozhi, and this is, you know, people should know this in general. Thenmozhi and I have been friends for I don't even know, 20 plus years at this
Oh
point.
wait, are we really that young? Really?
Since we were infants,
Yes, exactly.
and she was around for the very, very, very beginnings of Me Too. And we've had, you know, I can't imagine how many discussions about, and remember Ra, when her work with the girls in you know, in Vietnam, the Vietnamese girls. And we've had many, many, many discussions about how we tackle this issue and take it from triage and, you know, the kids knocking on my door at all hours of the night and what have you, to something like what we're doing now. So it's just been, it's so amazing to share this space with you. Like, this is one of my dearest friends in the world, but also one of the baddest organizers I've ever met, and one of the smartest people. So I appreciate you. And Carola, I'm so happy to meet you and be in community with you now. And just the idea of how this work in this way is not just spreading, because it's spread, it's all over, but that how we are able to connect and find each other and build on what's been happening all over, like from Selma to the Bronx to India to Mexico to Australia to, you know, wherever people are in the world, is just beyond my like wildest imagination. So this partnership with Global Fund for Women is important in, I just think, in measurable ways, because I think they're, to Maury's point, there are so many small grassroots organizations, small grassroots leaders spread out across the world who think there is no lifeline, who feel like there's no lifeline, and they will just have to keep doing what they've been doing the way they've been doing it in silos forever. And that's one of the things that we want to change. So I just wanted to thank y'all for that. I know we're closing out. So
Yes, that was a great segue once again to closing out. We're a few minutes over. I want to be good stewards of everyone's time and wrap us up. We have just a couple, I just have 2 minutes of not even 2 minutes of sort of next steps, because this is a full week of anniversary events for Me Too. And so just want to take a minute to thank you all for this really wonderful conversation, powerful conversation, and really excited about the work that's to come with Global Fund for Women. This is literally just the beginning. We are here to sort of announce our partnership, and our work now is designing and developing what the offering will be for the globe, now that we've gathered all of this data and had a lot of these conversations. So please stay tuned. There is a landing page that was dropped into the chat where you can indicate interest in being part of our global community. Feel free to reach out with questions that may come up for you after. We may not have the answers yet. We may still be developing how we're going to address all of the different sort of dynamics of going global. And so we ask for your patience as we're still working through all of that. Tomorrow, we have a day-long celebration starting at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. We sort of have 3 touch points throughout the day. It's 9:30 a.m., 2 p.m., and then we culminate at 6 p.m. with a closing celebration that will feature Tarana and a special recording from the Resistance Revival Choir, DJ Ara, and our host, Carlisa Johnson, who is Me Too's amazing communication strategist. Our IG at Me Too Movement has all the information, and please check your inbox if you are on our listserv. And that wraps our global conversation. Thank you again so much for all of your participation, and thank you for everyone who came to be with us. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Danny.
Good night, everybody.
Everyone.